Good morning and welcome to this corporate partner and affiliate webinar. My name is Lauren Humphrey and I'm part of the membership team at APM. A few housekeeping rules before I hand you over to Tricia Moon for the introductions. The webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, consisting of knowledge share and Q&A. All attendees are on mute. This is to avoid disruption. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A session, so please leave your questions in the question panel for us to address at the end. The webinar will be recorded and available to you as a resource on the past events section of the Corporate Hub. Without further ado, I'm pleased to hand you over to Tricia now.
Good morning. So I'm Tricia. I'm the Partnerships Manager for the APM's Corporate Benefits Programme. And I want to introduce you today to Wendy Shooter, who is a Chartered Organisational Psychologist. Now, she's been working in project organisations for 20 years, helping people think about how they work together to make things happen and helping them understand how their behaviours impact on others and the outcomes being achieved. So Wendy's specialist areas include culture, collaborations such as alliances and joint ventures, along with executive coaching. And she's also developed an approach to well-being that has a supporting phone app. So today Wendy's going to be sharing with us her thoughts and ideas around why it seems difficult for us to identify and replicate successful behaviours in project management. And this is the first in a series of 3 webinars we plan to host on the topic of behaviours this year. And it's something we found many of our corporates are eager to delve deeper into, with the recognition that people and their behaviour is a key focus for successful delivery of projects. So we hope you're going to enjoy today's session, and I'd like to hand you over straight away now to Wendy.
Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks for coming on our webinar today. Thanks Tricia for the intro. So I'll jump right in with what we're covering today. So as Tricia has outlined, we're covering today, we're looking at why it's been so difficult to replicate the successful behaviours. So we're going to do a series of 3 webinars, and we will be inviting questions, as has been explained already. But any questions that we can't answer, we will seek to answer in the upcoming webinars. We're also interested in any ideas you have or thoughts of things that you'd like me to include in the other webinars, because they are for you. So it's important to us that we do what you need and what you're interested in. So, why has it been so difficult to capture these behaviours through the lessons learned process? Before I get right into it, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background in relation to behaviour. Because we're talking about behaviour today and that is the focus, I thought I'd share that with you. So my first degree was in psychology and zoology, and I did actually do a final year project on penguin behaviour. So right from the early years, if you like, I've been very interested in behaviour. I quickly moved on to focus on the more human aspects, and I trained in counselling when I was quite young. So I trained in person-centred counselling, and that taught me about the deeper level of being human, if you like. So it gave me a really deep understanding of what it means to be humans, what our deeper drivers are, why we're inclined to do things the way we do them and approach the world in the way that we do. Now, I decided rather than be a counsellor, I wanted to take this knowledge and understanding into organisations. So I trained and did my Masters in Organisational Psychology and went on to become chartered. Now, what that meant was I did lots and lots of work in the area of organisational psychology. So as Trish has outlined, I've been doing all this great stuff in organisations for about 20 years, a lot of it in project organisations. So helping leaders to think about the cultures that they create through their behaviours and help them understand how they drive the behaviours of others with their behaviours. Helping people understand how their behaviour affects outcomes and how their behaviour affects other people. And you will see from the words on the word cloud, it's stuff that I'm sure you're all very familiar if you're from the large corporate organisations. One of the things that I've done quite a lot of is working with collaborations, so helping collaborations come together. I've also worked quite a lot with collaborations that have gone a bit wonky and everyone wants to have a big fight. And that's always been quite interesting because people often get to the point of knowing what the presenting problem is in the relationship. but actually understanding how it came to be is harder for them to identify. And so I've done quite a lot of work delving deeper with people in these joint ventures and alliances to understand, okay, so what actually happened, and getting to the micro behaviours behind the issues that we're seeing. So I've been talking to people about the underlying behaviours of why they do, of what's led to the current situations for lots and lots of years. I've trained in lots of psychometrics, that's behavioural stuff, and some coaching development work. And more recently, I trained to be a yoga teacher, and you might wonder why I'm sharing that with you today. Well, something that's important to me is to keep on learning. And I think a lot of the work that I do is about supporting other people to do things differently. So helping them to recognise what it might be helpful to do differently, and then to actually do that differently. And that's quite hard to change behaviour and to do things differently. So part of what I like to do is keep learning myself so that I can remember how difficult it is to do things differently, and have the empathy for the people that I work with in that way. These are some of the organisations that I've worked with over the years. So as you can see, lots of project organisations. So I've been around quite a lot of projects. Okay, so we're talking about behaviours through the lessons learned process and generally. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about lessons learned and why has it been so difficult to capture and replicate lessons learned generally. And I'll be focusing on this in relation to behaviours. So as a psychologist, I've been invited to talk to you today about the behaviours. So I'll just be paying a very brief visit to the other aspect. So lessons learned generally. Now, as I said, I've been in projects a long time, but in preparation for this webinar, I thought, okay, so I think I know what all the problems are, but rather than just use what's in my head, I'm going to talk to some of my clients that I've worked with in the past and present to ask for their thoughts on this question, on this very question. So this is what I've experienced myself and what people told me when I asked them the question. So in terms of capturing lessons learned, broadly, it happens in two ways. So where are the lessons learned held? So broadly, either sort of documented and filed. Occasionally, they make their way into organisational processes, and that's when they do actually serve of significant benefit. So they're held either in documented file or in people's heads. Now, it is useful to hold it in people's heads. It's not that that's not a useful thing, but they're broadly what people told me were the ways that this data was held. And when we talked about the retrieval challenges, because I've run quite a few lessons learned workshops, and I've quite often wondered how people then access this information afterwards. And when I asked people that question, they said yes, it is quite difficult. So there's a challenge in knowing where to look, a challenge in recognising that it might be useful to look. So what some people said to me is that project managers can have a tendency to be keen to get on with it, and to think that this new situation is unique. So actually we just need to move forward and get on with it. So there can be a natural inclination through the environment and personality to not necessarily be inclined to look for the lessons learned. And getting round to it. So we have lots of great intentions, and we live in a world where the to-do list is always much bigger than the hours available. So some things fall off the list, and it's something that I'm told tends to fall off the list. Now, what is the problem of when it's in people's heads? One is knowing who to ask. The other is accessing them, so getting hold of them, getting them to sit down with you. Asking the right questions, so we only get what we ask for usually, and their recollection, especially if it's some years on. So sometimes we might be looking to search the mental data files of colleagues for a project they worked on a couple of years ago or a few years ago, especially long life cycle projects. So they may have a low recollection, and one client actually shared a wonderful story. Well, it wasn't so wonderful, but a very interesting story about from their organisation, where they were doing a big very expensive project, and a similar one had been done by their colleagues in the States. So they went over to the States, they spent a week with them, they had lots of lessons learned conversations, they asked really good questions. And then 1 year in, they hit an engineering problem with this thing, I can't say what it was, that they're trying to build. And when they talked to the people in America, they said, oh yeah, we had that problem too. Okay, so why didn't you tell us? And they're like, oh, well, it didn't occur to us. So even though the project manager had done all the right things and spent time asking the questions, it was still reliant on the person in front of them recognising their need to know that bit of information. And we're talking about millions and millions here that it costs. And I don't think that example is alone in our world. So that's lessons learned generally. So this is before we even get to behaviours, some of the problems with capture and retrieval through the lessons learned process. But let's have a little look at behaviours. So behaviours, there's a couple of things that I would say are the biggest problem in capturing the behaviours. Understanding the relationship between cause and effect. So I think we do understand it to a degree. We know that if we do certain things, the output will be another thing. But I think we have a lower awareness of it than we could. And having a greater awareness of how our behaviour impacts others, or what happens as a result of our behaviour, will serve us all well, I would say. So think for a moment of a project manager who is scratching their head as to why they have no buy-in. I did my stakeholder engagement, I did all the things to get buy-in, but my team just aren't bought in to my plan. And then you look a bit deeper, you go and talk to the project team and you find out what actually happened, and they might say something along the lines of, well, he got us in a room and told us what the plan was and that we needed to get on with it. And when anyone tried to talk about possible problems with that, we were shouted down and told to just get on with it. So that actually does happen quite a lot, I would say. And that's an example of where one person believes that they've done the right behaviour to get the outcome that they want, but actually they're not aware of how their behaviour impacts others, how their behaviour has caused that effect. The other problem, I think, is that of importance, understanding the importance. So it's really interesting, Tricia saying at the beginning, our big corporate, our members recognise how important behaviours are. And what's really interesting here is people know on one level, but they don't recognise it on a deeper level. So everyone will say, oh yeah, behaviours are really important. And then you try and get them to invest time or energy in it, and they become less important. Now, part of the problem I think here is people aren't sure what to do or how to do it. But I think part of it is they don't realise how important. They know that they are important, but they don't realise how important. So I would say that the biggest kind of mega problems, if you like, are not understanding the connection between cause and effect, and not recognising the importance enough. So we all recognise the connection between cause and effect sometimes, and we all know behaviours are important, but do we know how important? So let's have a bit more of a look at capturing the behaviours and why it's so difficult. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm just going to ask you to answer it in your heads. So how much time is given to behaviours in a lessons learned workshop? What percentage? Give yourself a little percentage in your head. And because I've asked people this question quite a lot in the last few weeks, and I say to them, I reckon less than 5%. And they kind of go, I don't really want to say yes, but actually you're right. So I would say less than 5%. And I said, actually, in reality, maybe 2%. And they go, oh, yeah, I think you're right. So interestingly, when I went in first with the question of how much time do you reckon is given to behaviours in lessons learned process, I reckon about 2%. They go, no. But when I took them through the questioning in this way, they went, yeah, do you know what, you're right. So my experience of lessons learned workshops, so it's a 3-hour lessons learned workshop, so the last 10 minutes is on behaviours. That's my experience, but I don't think it's unusual. So another problem, how much can you remember? How much can you remember? And we tend, with behaviour, we tend to remember the outputs of the behaviour, as in we didn't feel listened to, rather than the inputs of the behaviour. So what happened? Well, we weren't invited to the project planning meeting. But we tend to remember the outputs, not the inputs. And people tend to ask questions about the outcomes rather than the inputs of the behaviour. So it's really hard to get into the detail. And also people have different perceptions around what's important. And I'll say a bit more about that later. Now, this other one is, how specific are you? So this is a bit about what I was talking about. So these are my favourites, and these are the ones that get said all of the time. Oh, communication was terrible. What did we need to do differently in behaviours? Oh, communication was terrible. Oh yeah, it gets written on the flip chart, and that could mean so many different things. So we need to start getting more into what I call the micro behaviours and being more specific about what we mean by behaviours. And the other one is, there was no collaboration, and that means a million trillion different things, and we're going to go more into that later. So that's about capturing the behaviours. Now let's have a little look about replicating the behaviours, the successful behaviours. So we'll just pretend for a minute that we've managed to capture them, and then we can have a think about, okay, so what gets in the way of us actually replicating the behaviours? What gets in the way of us doing these successful behaviours in project management? And there's 5 areas here, and I'm going to go through each of these in detail, so I'll just touch on them lightly in this moment. So attached, so we're all quite attached to the way we behave, so we don't really like to do it differently. That's a problem. Intent, we somehow think that intent is enough. We do this with lots of things. Buying the running shoes will mean that that we get fit. Buying the gym membership, that's the classic, isn't it? Not at the moment, but yeah. So, oh yeah, I bought my gym membership. Have you been? Oh no. Clarity. So being clear about what's needed. So what are the behaviours that we need here? Competence. Knowing what to do and how to do it. And conditions. So that's the culture, the context, and the contract. So in project management, the contract will drive your behaviours quite a lot. Okay, so I'm going to show you my model for helping us think about behaviour and understanding why we do the things that we do. So imagine this is you in your own unique little world. So we all have our own unique perception of whatever is going on. So in the same way, if you're all in a football stadium, you would all have a unique physical perception of the match. No 2 people at a football match would have the same physical perception of what's going on. And we tend to think that what we see is the truth, but what we actually see is partial truth. But we tend to believe that what we see is the truth. So our perception is the truth. So our perception goes to create the world. And also, if you think about eyewitness reports, so the police will tell you that no 2 eyewitness reports are the same. That sounds crazy. How can that be? If 2 people were at the same event and saw the same thing, how come no 2 reports are ever the same? Well, it's because of our own unique world and our own unique perspective. And this is created through our whole life, through our life experiences. So this can be what happens to us at different points in our life, the people that we're exposed to. It's about our drives and our values, what's important to us, and our beliefs. So what our parents told us was important will have a big impact on how we see the world. What our peers in our early years told us and thought and what our experiences were. But as we go through life, we have different experiences, and they shape us and they shape how we see the world. So those of you that have been through big life changes, for example, having children, when you have children, you suddenly see the world completely differently. And things that you used to perceive in one way, you might now perceive in a different way. And it's the same with the whole of the aging process, actually. And I think that this is also pertinent for organisational experiences. So our early organisational experiences, the culture of those early organisations we were in and the departments that we were in, will go a long way to shaping how we perceive the world. So our life experiences, drivers, values, beliefs are more of the, they do change, but they change more slowly. But on a more day-to-day level, our emotions impact our perception, and our recent experiences will impact our perception as well. Now, if you think about a meeting, if you've ever been in a meeting with colleagues and you come out and you're chatting to them about what happened in the meeting, and you think, were we in the same meeting? Because their perception about what happened is completely different to your perception about what happened. And this will be because we will notice the things that are important to us. So if you think of yourself as a project person and maybe an engineer, depending on your sector, or the equivalent of an engineer in the meeting, and what you notice and what you hear and what you believe about some of the decisions that have been made in that meeting are. Because we will hear what we want to hear. We will notice the things that match our experiences and what we want to happen. And we can shut out things that aren't a match for that. It really is quite incredible. So yes, a great one here is a decision at a football match. So a referee's decision at a football match, half the stadium think it's a great decision, half the stadium think it's a terrible decision. What was it? It was the decision. But we all see it differently depending on our world perspective. So our world perspective goes quite a long way to driving our behaviour. So believe it or not, most people behave in the way they feel is appropriate to that scenario, to that situation in that moment. You might be looking at them thinking, why on earth are they behaving like that? That was really unhelpful. But for them in that moment, they think that that is the most appropriate behaviour in that moment. So let's think about, say, a weekly project meeting and how different project managers might approach that weekly project meeting. So one project manager might, their meetings might last 10 minutes, and their version of a project meeting is to just tell everybody what they should be doing, and then tell them to go off and get on with it. Another project manager might have meetings that last for 3 hours and go through all the data that's available, all the information that's available, and have very detailed discussions about all of it. And another project manager might have more of a general focus, more of an exploration. How are people? How has it been going? What's going on for people? What's going on in the projects? And so forth. So depending on your world, your worldview, you will take a different approach to how you run those meetings. And also depending on your worldview, you will enjoy or not enjoy those meetings depending on how you like to do things and who you are. So that's a little bit about us as humans and how our behaviour is created. And what we will do is we will find a behaviour that gets our needs met, and then we will repeat that behaviour. So for example, when we're really little, when we cry, our mother picks us up, hopefully. So we learn behaviours, we learn how to get our needs met through our behaviours, and then we just repeat those behaviours. So this is why the whole thing about unhelpful reinforcement can happen. So bullying is your classic here. So if a bully gets their needs met through their bullying behaviour, they will continue, if you think about young children now, they will continue to use that behaviour. Now that can then come into their adult life. If no one ever really challenges them on that then becomes how they get things done. Now, the problem here is that individual hasn't developed other ways to get their needs met. So when we start asking them to do things differently, it's really hard for them, because they literally don't know how to do things differently. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that now. So going back to the 5 areas that I talked about, we're going to go into each of them in detail. And this first one is about attachment. So we're very attached to our behaviours. And as I've just explained, our whole life has gone into creating them. So we think that they're the right way to do things. So using these tried and tested behaviours, we feel kind of familiar to us. So we feel safe. And we believe that there's a level of predictability. So these behaviours that we've used lots of times, we have a belief that if we do this, that will happen, because that's what's happened lots of times in the past. And it's really interesting how even when the impact they're hoping to get isn't happening, they still continue to use those behaviours. One, because it's so ingrained, because they've been doing it for so long, and 2, because they don't know how to do it differently, or they haven't got time to do it differently today. And that's because it takes a lot of effort, but I'm going to talk about that later. So part of it can be that we see it as part of our personality. So the way we behave, the way we do things, we will see as, oh, that's my personality, that's who I am. So having the consideration that that isn't helpful, and that that's wrong, is not great. So we don't like to have the thought that our personality might be wrong. So we're making a connection that isn't right there. It's just the behaviours that are maybe unhelpful to others. So, and if we do need to do it differently, as I said, then previously we must have been doing it wrong, and we couldn't possibly have been doing it wrong, especially if it's been for a long time. So if we've been doing a certain behaviour for a really long time, if we're later in our careers particularly, then it's so hard to hear that. So if we take the team engagement example, if someone has been using that style to engage, to get buy-in, if you like, for 10 years, trying to help them understand how that behaviour doesn't get buy-in, they will work quite hard to reject that data, because they won't want to think that what they've been doing for the last 10 years is wrong. Now, with behaviour, something that's important to think about is that no actual behaviour is wrong. It's just helpful, more helpful or less helpful, depending on the situation. So if we take the example of being action-oriented. So being action-oriented, that sounds good, doesn't it? How about impatient? How is that? Now, the micro-behaviours that sit behind those labels are exactly the same. But sometimes that behaviour is really helpful, and sometimes that behaviour is really unhelpful. So it's not about stopping behaviours, it's about broadening our behavioural range. So the more behaviours we've got in our bag, the more opportunity we have to pick out the most helpful behaviour for that scenario. So that's an important thing to remember. So don't judge yourself as having bad behaviours. It's about, let's have some more behaviours so that we can try out some different things and have an even bigger impact on making things happen at work. So that's attachment, why we were so attached to our behaviours. I'm going to talk now about intent. So, anyone ever been to this meeting? Okay, can everyone be more collaborative, please? And remember, communication is key. What happens? The team go, oh yeah, of course, yes, I will be more collaborative, and I know communication is key. Yeah, he's right, we need to be better at communication. Yeah. Thanks. And they believe it will be different and they'll live happily ever after. Whereas nothing will happen as a result of that. I'd say quite often nothing happens as a result of that. Occasionally you might have it, that might stay with someone for 10 minutes and they might do one thing and then it's gone. So this whole thing about intent is quite interesting, because we do fall into this trap quite a lot. Again, it's like buying the running shoes and we think, we've done it. So we will have good intent around behaviour. So we want to have a positive impact on others. We want communication to be working well. We want to be collaborative. But are we willing to do the things to make it a reality? And that's why I say that people don't recognise enough how important behaviour is, because they recognise that it is important, but do they recognise it is important enough to make the changes that need to be made? So, intent alone is not enough. Unrealistic beliefs about how easy it is for behaviour change to occur, which is the example we just saw. So, digging beneath that, these are some of the challenges, if you like. So, the key thing within this is a lack of awareness that people don't necessarily have the understanding of how behaviour works. We're back to cause and effect. The clarity of what's required, or the competence to deliver that. And I'm going to talk more about clarity and competence later. So one of the problems is when things go really well on projects, people often don't recognise the impact of behaviours. So the problem with behaviours is when they're working really well, it just all looks seamless and fine. They're less visible. People notice them less. People notice the behaviours when it's all going wrong, and when it's having really negative impact. But the positive behaviours, when behaviours going well, it's less visibly there for us. It's happening on a deeper level, and it's seen more in the outputs and the lack of drama. So people don't join the dots from when it's gone well to the behaviours that created that. Thinking that saying it will make it so. And I've sat in meetings with project directors that say, well, I told them that, I said in that meeting that we needed to collaborate more. Why haven't they done that? And sometimes people think that just saying it out loud in a meeting will make something happen, and they're not doing the cause and effect about actually having to do things to make things happen, which I always find quite interesting. So the classic here is we need to make more effort. And people do this about behaviours. They talk about behaviours in a we just need to. And we think behaviour is easy. And part of the problem here is because we all do behaviours all the time, and we've been doing behaviours all our life, and we are actually quite good at them. I'm talking here now about how we're not good at them, but actually we're pretty amazing. Humans are pretty amazing. If you think of everything you've learned behaviourally since you were born, that's quite a lot. So we are amazing. We are great at behaviours, and to really make the shift we need to make, we need to be even better at it. So part of the problem is that we don't recognise the gap. And listening is one of my favourites as well. So listening, well, everyone knows how to listen. That's not my experience. So, and listening is a micro behaviour. And when you start talking to people about listening and helping people listen better, they get twitchy. They don't quickly recognise that might be a problem, and that might be something worth investing in. Well, no, we all know how to listen. And there's a thing about thinking that because we know about it, I'm coming on to that, we think because we know about something that we're actually doing it. I had something with a project team actually that were having some real problems, and I was asked to support the management team. And there was a particular model that I was going to do with them that I thought would be really helpful. And the HR person said, "Oh, they've done that model." I said, "Oh, okay, are they doing it? Are they living it?" No. So, well, they haven't done it then. And this is the problem. We take stuff in about behaviour. We might watch a YouTube video, and we think because we know about it in our heads that we're actually doing it, and we're not. So we need to be better at recognising that. We're surrounded by behaviour, so we think we're better at it than we are. I've talked quite a bit about that. And also, the longer we've been doing something, and this goes back to the attached, we're more reluctant to question it because it's part of us, and making it unpart of us can be difficult. So we need to invest effort to build that clarity. And we're going to come on to that. So clarity is the next area that I'd like to visit. So there's something here about being able to move from Megga labels to micro behaviours. So the Megga labels that I think we overuse are things like collaboration and communication are my favourites because they just get used all the time. But it's like, what are you talking about? So when we say, oh, we need to be better at collaboration, I'd like you to actually just take a moment, just think of what is a micro behaviour for collaboration. So what are some of the day-to-day behaviours that we have to do in order to have the outcome of collaboration? So just have one, just think for a moment. I'll share some of mine in a minute. So one of the problems here with these Megga labels is that we all have an understanding of what collaboration means and what communication means. And when the word is used, we think that everybody thinks the same as us. And there will be overlap in what we think, but there'll be a lot of non-overlap as well. So using the Megga labels like collaboration and communication doesn't affect change because we need people to think in terms of the micro behaviours, the little behaviours, so that it then becomes action. Go and be more collaborative. What are you going to do? If I said to you, can you go and be more collaborative, please? What would you do? You go, yeah, and you'd have the intent, and it would be a genuine intent. But because there isn't clarity of exactly the behaviour I'm asking you to do, you probably won't quite get round to it. Or you might go and have a chat with someone and think, oh, I've been collaborative. I asked them how their day was. So people tend, actually, this is the classic with collaboration, people tend to think that anything that involves talking to another person or having another person in the room means that there's been collaboration, and that isn't it. I've just written an article in Project actually about that. It's coming out in the autumn edition. So we don't tend to get into the micro behaviours of what we actually mean. And as I said, our individual wills will have a different set of micro behaviours, what that means. Now, we don't tend to think in terms of the micro behaviours, and people often can't describe the micro behaviours. And I know this because I've asked them to lots. So in doing behavioural diagnosis, so working to understand what's working well in projects, what's gone wonky. I've also done some work looking at defining the behaviours that enable project management, so that's something that I've done as well. So when I've done this digging around so what does good behaviour look like and what does less helpful behaviour look like, I know I have to ask quite a lot of questions to get to the micro behaviours because they're just not how we normally think. They're not in our psyche, or they're not at the top of our minds. They're in there because when I delve, people are able to give them to me, but they're not at the top of our minds. So people don't naturally think and describe the micro behaviours. I think we can get into those habits, but at the moment it's buried deep. So we need to learn, we need to more regularly and find a way to bring it up so that people have better access to it. So, and as I said, without the micro behaviour clarity, nothing will happen, or very little. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I mean by micro behaviours now. So here's collaboration. So these are what I mean by micro behaviours in relation to collaboration. I'll let you have a little look at those. So that's getting into the minutiae of the behaviours. Seeks input and listens to understand. So asking people what they think isn't the same as listening to understand. People are often waiting to speak more than listening. Okay, going to move on to the next area. I can talk about collaboration for hours, so I'm going to move on. Competence. We all like to think that we're competent. So what do I mean by competence? So knowledge. So having the knowledge of a behaviour. What is that behaviour? And this is where we usually stop. We get the knowledge bit of the behaviour. So we might watch a YouTube video on listening skills. And we think because we know about it, we're doing it. But the skill, developing the skill is a whole different story. And I've done quite a lot of training development and helping doing the thing, you know, where you work with actors and you do practice and you try the skill and you get feedback and then you try again. It's like learning to ride a bike. You have to do a lot of trial and error. You don't just like watch a video on how to ride a bike or driving a car or riding a motorbike. Learning to ride a motorbike is the hardest thing I've ever done. You don't just have the knowledge and be able to do it. You need to have the skill. So there needs to be practice and feedback in order to develop the skill, and that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen very much, and without that road testing the skill and understanding what the impact of what we're doing is, we can't fine tune it. We can't hone it. So that is a key aspect, I think, that we sort of know, but we don't do. It's a classic one of we know that it's important, but we don't do it. So that's knowledge, that's skill. So you can have the skill, but then we need the ability to use it, the ability to blend it with other behaviours, the ability to pull it out of the bag and put it into play at the right moment. And the judgment is knowing when to use it. So the ability is about being able to use it in conjunction with other things in the flow of a meeting, in the flow of an interaction, and the judgment is knowing when to do it. So there's lots of stuff there. And what I see happen with behaviours is people go on a training course and then they might have an intention. Oh yeah, I've been on that course. Yeah. They have an intention to do it, but it's well, I can't do it in that meeting. It's too important. Oh, I can't try that. It's too important. So there needs to be a whole hand-holding process to get people to try them out in non-high stakes scenario, because you will never use a new behaviour in a difficult situation. Never. You will go back to your tried and tested, or what you believe in your heart is tried and tested. Might be have terrible outcomes, but it feels safe to you. So in that difficult moment, you will not pull a new behaviour out of the bag and put it into play. You just won't do it. So what you need to do is to build it up. So we need to practice them in safer environments. So using them in less high stakes scenario, and then get more input. So people will try them in a non-high stakes scenario, and then go, oh, I did that, it didn't work. Okay, so what actually happened? And this is one of the reasons coaching has been so popular. Coaching is a really helpful intervention, and it's thought of as really supporting behavioural development, because the person comes back to the coach and has a discussion about what happened when they tried to put that new behaviour into play. And now what's really difficult here is each scenario and each person is subtly different. So we've looked at our worlds, our individual worlds, and talked about how they're all subtly different. So each scenario will be subtly different and each person will be subtly different. So And also, people are quite good at remembering to do half the behaviour and not the other half. So when they're talking about, it's like, oh, did you pedal the wheels? And look where you were going. Oh no, I just pedalled the wheels. Ah, you need to look where you're going too. Because we can only take in so much at once. So it's unrealistic to give people a do this, 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 and this, off you go. They need to do it slowly, and to be able to get more input. So we need planning. We need to plan when we're going to try the new behaviour. We need to have the knowledge of how to do it. We need to develop the skill. We need to be committed to doing it, to trying it. We need to be engaged. We need to be able to review what we've done and get new input. Above all, we need the energy and the effort. And trial and error. So that's a whole load of stuff. So this is, if you look at all of that and think all that's involved here, it starts to make sense as why it's being so difficult for us to replicate these more successful behaviours. So I'm going to move on now to culture. So culture, organisational culture, is just our world, but it's on a bigger scale. So it's the individual worlds of the people in the organisation come together to create a group world. So that organisational culture has its own unique perspective and its own unique behaviours based on what it thinks is important. So have we ever had this experience where on the wall there's a poster going, one team, we're all working in collaboration with the supply chain, yay! And then you're in a meeting with your boss and they're going, oh, you need to watch them like a hawk. They really can't be trusted, that supply chain, and you need to jump on them if they do anything. I've seen this loads. And they will be doing some collaborative things, but it's, oh yeah, we'll all go to the races together. Yeah, we need to do a bit more than that. So again, we're back to intent. But at the end of the day, whatever the culture is, whatever the boss says is what will be. So you can write what you like on the wall, but it's what your boss says in the meeting that will drive the behaviours. So let's have a little look at this, the conditions. So we are social creatures. We align to others in the group. Now, I find it fascinating how quickly we'll adjust into an organisational culture. It really is quite astounding. But that is the basis of evolution. It's the survival of the fittest, the best fit to the environment, as you know. So we are amazing at adapting to the culture. So we will work in line with the culture around us, and we will adjust to that quite quickly. Usually, there's always exceptions. We will do the behaviours that are recognised and rewarded by the power people. So your boss's boss. There's other power players often around a project that are not necessarily have structural power, but they just have power. And recognised and rewarded isn't necessarily money. Recognised and rewarded means being listened to, being thought of as someone who is useful, gets invited to the meeting, gets invited to comment. So that's what recognised and rewarded means in terms of culture. So the behaviours that are in line with the power people, or what the power people think is important, are the ones that you will get in your project. Whatever you put on the wall, you will get those behaviours. And contract is king. So you can sit around and have some lovely workshops and have some beautiful intentions and write them on some lovely posters. But if the contract is driving adversarial behaviours, that's what you'll get. And that is how it will be. It will be almost impossible to override that. And one of the problems that some of my clients were telling me about is that contracts can get created by people who don't realise the impact that they're having on the behaviours. So because behaviour is so um, isn't understood by quite a lot of people. It's partly understood, but we don't know what we don't know. So one of the problems that's happening in projects is that the contracts that projects are working to are created by people who don't understand how some of the content that they're changing is impacting on behaviours. And then they go, well, why aren't you collaborating? You should be collaborating. And actually it's because of the contract. So I've talked us through the 5 areas of replicating the successful behaviours and what gets in the way. So next time we'll be talking about, okay, so what can we do? But what I'd like to leave you with before we go to Q&A is some things that you can do in the meantime. So what can you do today, tomorrow, to help you think about behaviours in projects, help you think about successful behaviours in projects, and maybe start to develop some, who knows. So self-awareness is the first step. You will have heard this before. So just become your own observer. Notice what you do. Notice how it impacts on others. Just have a little bit more of that observer of cause and effect. Observe others. So notice what they do. Notice how it impacts on others. We're often better at observing others than ourselves. If you're really brave, you could ask a trusted colleague that's in meetings with you a lot. Don't sit down and just go, oh, can you tell me about how my behaviour impacts on others? Because that can be a little bit, bit hard to swallow. You could just ask about a particular intention that you have and ask if they've noticed how that's impacting, if you're getting that or maybe not. So become an observer. So notice what you do and how it impacts. Notice what others do and how it impacts. Understand, start to build your own knowledge base about cause and effect. When I do this, that happens. When they do that, that happens. Join the dots. Start to join the dots a bit more. And then, because I'm a trainer at the end of the day, can't resist, here's some stuff you can do if you like. You don't have to do this, but if you'd like to, work through, and the slides are available on the APM website. So if you want to have a think about the behaviours you're attached to, this is a little thing you can do. Just pick 3 words to describe your personality. Think about the behaviours that you do to reinforce that. And then ask yourself if you overuse them, because we tend to overuse behaviours. So there's some behaviours that we're really fond of and get us good results, and we tend to overuse them. So have a think about that. Intent. What have you got intent about that you never quite do? And try and make it a work one, not or you can make it a personal one if you like the running shoes. But maybe it's about inviting someone into part of your project. Maybe it's having catch-ups with somebody on your project that you don't tend to speak to very much, and you're keen to understand their world. Clarity. So when you think of your intent, think about what are the micro behaviours that would enable that. And then maybe you can think about a micro behaviour you'd like to build. And you can, so much on YouTube. There is so much good stuff on YouTube that it's worth having a look at. And then the condition, if you want to think about the culture, reflect on the unhelpful behaviours that you might have fallen into because of your environment. And you might be in an amazing environment and they've just made your behaviours just super. But often there's something that we've fallen into. So next time, we're going to look at how we can be better at capturing and replicating these behaviours. And as I said, it's an evolving beast. So do let us know anything you'd like covered in future ones on this topic. And in the meantime, do connect with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my email if you want to email me about anything. I've written something recently on lessons from lockdown, mindsets and behaviours that from the project world. and I've got an article in the next edition of Project on behaviours, and yeah, come visit me. So thank you very much, and I think Lauren is gonna ask me some questions now, maybe, if you've written any. So if you haven't, then put some questions in so she can ask me.
Thank you, Wendy. That was great. Really, really good presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. We have one question to kick off from Ian. He said, significant difference between lessons observed and lessons learned, please.
Oh, I don't understand. In behaviours, lessons observed and lessons learnt. So with behaviours, so when we observe behaviours, that we notice in the moment, we often notice a behaviour in the moment, and we'll recognise that it's helpful or unhelpful in the moment, but then translating that into learning, so translating that into actually doing something differently or helping others to do something differently, it takes a lot more effort, and it takes quite a lot of effort for us to do things differently, and even more to try and help others to do things differently. So, and this is where we go back to intent. So often there'll be an intent around translating the observation to the learnt, but the cogs in the wheel don't happen, I think, is one of the problems that we have.
That's great. Thank you, Wendy. I don't have any other questions at the moment. Oh, Tracy has just said, you spoke about one key macro behaviour. Can you give an example of others, please?
Okay. So some other macro behaviours. Leadership. We need leadership. What other ones do people tend to say? We need to do better. We need to have a better understanding. We need to do some analysis. There's some very broad terms that people tend to talk in rather than getting into the detail. But it is when we get into the detail. I mean, leadership is a classic. Oh, they need leadership, and people will go away and try and do that, but they might not do the most helpful type of leadership, or they might not have the skills for that. We need to people need direction. So yeah, in what sort of direction? So it's people will talk about outcomes rather than the steps that it takes to get the outcome. So the outcome in that example would be that people need to have direction and understand where we're heading. But what are the things that will make that happen is a different thing.
Thank you. Tracy said she understands now. She said thank you. She loves the leadership one. We've got a question from Zara. And she said, hi, Wendy. Can you share how to cut through behaviours where you are new to a team and so people are very stuck in their behaviours, especially when you're also younger and female in a very male-dominated team?
I don't know how you cut through behaviours. I don't understand cut through behaviours. If you're able to quickly type something.
I mean, the way I read it was like a team culture is already present. How would Zara then enter that team and kind of cut through?
Change the culture.
Yeah, change the reset behaviours of the team.
Yeah, that's really difficult. And it's not something that I can answer in 1 minute. It's the culture needs to happen through the leader. So the people will behave in the way their leader behaves, in the way the team leader behaves. And I'll talk about this next time. There are tiny things that you can do to affect the culture, but I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult to be in the position you're in and completely transform the culture. I'm not saying there aren't any things that you can do. One of the things, I'll give you one thing that you can do, which is just feedback to people what you're seeing. So, and summary is a great way to do that. So you can just summarise back to people what they're saying, and that can be a helpful way to help people understand some of their behaviour or what they're saying. And it depends on so many things. You could speak to a leader. If you have that sort of relationship, it depends how you feel about that. To talk about some of the behaviours you think it'd be helpful to change. You could see about thinking about something that's important to the team, helping the team identify something that the team is trying to change or trying to do differently or trying to achieve, and think of something that would enable that you would like to see in the culture, and try and introduce it that way. So doing the carrot. What I would say is go one little behaviour at a time, rather than trying to change everything. So just trying to think of one thing that you might want to change, and that might be that they listen for longer. And if you want them to listen for longer, then you can say, "Oh, I'm not sure you quite heard me," and things like that. So, but that's a very big topic. A very big topic. I could write a book on that topic, in fact. And you could actually get a mentor. If you can get a mentor, that would be helpful. Actually, that'd be really helpful if you're young and early career. It's really, and in that male and I know exactly what you mean. It's really helpful to get a female mentor. I don't know if that's something that happens within the APM, that they set up mentors for people, or it might happen in your organisation. But I strongly advise that if that's possible for you.
Thank you, Wendy. Zara said thank you. That's very helpful.
Great.
So that brings us to the end of the allotted time. We don't have any other questions as yet, but if anyone puts any through as Tricia brings this to a close, we can certainly answer those, as we still have some attendees online.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just thank you as well, Wendy. A great start into what will progress as a topic for us. It won't just carry on this year, it's certainly going to be something for the next year as well. So just to recap that, we'll be putting information on the website about the next two that Wendy will be running. One will be October, one will be December. And so covering off on the second one, how we can be better at capturing and replicating the successful behaviours, and then moving on into December about the drivers behind those behaviours and observing the behaviours that do but also don't help in a project environment. So definitely look out for those, and do feel free to email in with any comments or thoughts about more topics around the behavioural side of project delivery that you'd like to see from us, because we're always looking to expand on our webinar programmes while we're in this virtual world at the moment. If there are no more questions, I'd just like to thank everybody for dialing in, and once again to Wendy for delivering a really good topic for us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye for everybody then.